Hello again, here we are for Amending and the Amendments. Now, we have taken the last few videos to go through the history of and the basic framework of the Constitution, and we're actually almost through. We're up to Article 5, and there's only 8. So, we're almost at the end. Article 5 is important because it establishes the ability to amend the Constitution. Now, there are 3 ways to amend the Constitution. 1, the Congress, when 2/3 of both houses vote, can deem it necessary. Or, a national convention can be called by Congress to convene on a single matter. However, it has to be applied by the legislatures of 2/3 of the states, which right now would be 34. And the convention would have to approve it. Or the legislatures of 3/4 of the states within the stipulated time period. You also could have a state ratifying convention where 3/4, presently 38 of the states, within any stipulated time period, being ratified, an amendment becomes an operative addition. Amendments, a national convention or a state ratifying convention have never been called. Usually amendments do move through the Congress, are signed by the President, and go out to the states for ratification. Unless Congress stipulates a time, however, amendments can sit in front of the states for a very, very long time. In my research for this article, and I did not know this, I found 5 separate amendments, some of whom have been sitting on the books for almost 150 years. So that is very interesting, and if you want to look at those, there it's on Wikipedia. It's a quick Google search. It's not too hard to find. So basically you have state ratifying conventions, you have a national convention, or you have Congress. Those are your ways to change the Constitution, and it takes an overwhelming majority, which means people really have to agree on it before anything is going to actually occur. I'm okay with that, but we'll talk about that as the series progresses. We'll talk about that process. I was recently talking with someone who was like, why can't we do this? We need to change this, all this stuff. And I'm kind of like, listen, it's not easy. Like, it's hard to do. It is not an easy, and it's not an easy thing to accomplish. So, I want to move through all the amendments as fast as possible and let you know what they do, why they exist, and why they're important. A lot of these you'll recognize. Some of them might be kind of new. Now, interestingly enough, the first 10, which we call the Bill of Rights, was a part of a greater document, some of which did not get ratified. And some of which didn't get ratified till way, way later. Of the 12 articles, Article the 1st never got ratified. Article the 2nd didn't get ratified till 1992. And so once, concerning a guarantee of rights, the Constitutional Convention before 1787 could not come together before 1791, could not come together on the exact rights and how they should be enumerated. In fact, Thomas Jefferson took the lead on getting the Bill of Rights through, and so did some other important people, including John Adams, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg, and several other people, upon its passage, the Constitution's passage, the rights would immediately be amended on once Congress convened. They felt more confident about getting amendments on than trying to do it in the context of the Constitutional Convention, where it had to be ratified by the states. So, that's what they did. In 1791, they created what we now know as the Bill of Rights. They got it through Congress, and they got some of it ratified by the states. So, Article the 1st handles an enumeration of representatives. That was not ratified, nor will it ever be, because it no longer applies. Article the 2nd did not get ratified till 1992, and it's no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened, which basically means if you raise your salary, Congress, it does not take effect until the next term. So it's not one of those like, well, we'll raise our salary and we'll get it next week. It comes after the next election. Now the rest of these you'll recognize, very familiar, as the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Obviously, this establishment of religion has been one of the most debated clauses, I think, in the 20th century, in terms of what constitutes an establishment of religion, and there's a constant tussle about this, because not only does it make no law respecting an establishment of religion, but it also cannot prohibit the free exercise. So there's this kind of difference of Congress can't establish a national religion, as most countries in Europe had at the time, and some still do. Congress cannot establish a religion, and it can't stop you from freely practicing your religion. Now that has been construed as saying a government official cannot do something in the name of religion, that's considered establishment, but people can freely do something on their own. Again, this has changed as time has gone on, and as the religious attitudes of our country has changed. The Congress cannot make any law abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, which means you can say and print what you wish, or to stop people from peaceably assembling, and to petition the government for redress of grievances, which is what enshrines you with your right to protest. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, obviously, this is a hot-button topic on gun control. If you want to hear me talk about all that, please go on YouTube, go to the Cameron Cowan Show. I go through the whole thing about gun control. I encourage you to do that there. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This is the Fourth Amendment, and it's very important because it gives you your right not to be searched without a warrant. That means not letting police in your home or in your car. Those things are all unconstitutional. During the British period, the British like to house people, put their soldiers, house them in the colonials' houses so that they were forced to feed and water them and deal with the expense of actually keeping up the army, so the British government did not have to. And the British government had the prerogative to come in and search property at will without any recourse. The Founding Fathers wanted to make sure that they did not have to live like that ever again. The infamous Fifth Amendment, when you hear people saying, "Oh, I plead the Fifth," this is what they're talking about. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Two things. Obviously, the first part has to do with you do not have to perjure yourself. If someone accuses you of something, you do not have to say anything that would perjure yourself in terms of, and would provide, you do not have to provide evidence that causes you to be guilty of any crime. It says that you cannot be tried twice for the same crime. So when someone goes back to trial for something, they have to find a different charge to charge the person on. Otherwise, they cannot return it. It's called double jeopardy. And then two, if the government confiscates land for public use, then they have to compensate you for it. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of the counsel of his defense. Now, most of us who've watched a crime show, including the making of a murder documentary, are familiar with this. It basically provides for you a right to a lawyer when you're charged and a right to a fair and speedy trial of your peers, of people where the crime was committed. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. That's the 8th, 9th, and 10th Amendments, respectively. The 10th Amendment, which I talk about when we get to the states, is very important because it always... The founding fathers always want to remind us that the rights begin and end with us in the states. Always with us, and that's where these things do certainly belong. And they're always trying to remind us of this. It's very important to do so. And that's the first 10 amendments. It's good to keep those in mind because when you hear people talk about the Bill of Rights, that's what they're talking about. So it's good to be familiar with that. Now we're going to dash through quickly the rest of these amendments. Those are kind of the important ones. The rest of these are pretty short. The 11th Amendment confines the judicial power of the United States. It says the judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or citizens of any foreign state, which means that the federal courts do not deal with anything from a person in a foreign state, so the federal government is not obligated to defend someone who's being sued or has a criminal charge in a foreign country. The 12th Amendment in 1804 changes how the vice president is elected, and we already talked about that in Article 2. It's a kind of a long read, so we'll not go through it here. I encourage you to do so. Number 13, ratified December 6, 1865, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Congress shall have the power to enforce the article by appropriate legislation. That's the abolishment of slavery. The 14th Amendment establishes modern citizenry the way we now think of it. This was important because it basically laid down the law of how slaves were in this country. When I get in my next video to the 3/5 Compromise, we'll talk about slavery. Then this is the important part. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So under the 14th Amendment, you get a verification of citizenry, and again another proviso for equal protection and due process of law. They also fix some things to do with representation and some technical things about the states, the seceding states coming back into the country, and it also excludes former Confederate officers and people in the Confederate government from running for office. The 15th Amendment is important because it extends universal suffrage to slaves. At that time, only male slaves, but to former slaves. The 16th Amendment gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states, without regard to any census or enumeration. There is much debate on whether that's constitutional, but we're not going to talk about that right now. The 17th changes how the Senate is elected. We talked about this in Article 2, that senators are now directly elected. Now we're up to 18. And this is repealed on December 5th, 1933, with the ratification of 21. This outlaws alcohol. The manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the importation thereof into or exportation thereof from the United States. 19. The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States by any state on account of sex. This gives voting rights to women. 20 is on January 23rd, 1933. It moves the presidential inauguration to January. Previously, it actually was in March. It was when the change of power occurred, and it got moved to January. And it basically moves the inauguration of president and the opening sessions of Congress to January. And it says it begins on the 3rd day of January. And then sets up how that shall occur. It also allows Congress to provide for the case of death of any of the persons from the House, and also establishes the way we do it now of the it says if at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of president, the president shall have died, the vice president elect shall become president. It sets up this kind of contingency for that, and also for a new election. 21, the 18th article of amendment to the United States Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed, and it now allows the transportation, importation, and possession of intoxicating liquors to be allowed once again. 22 is interesting because it actually sets a term limit for president. FDR ran for 4 terms, and people were unhappy that he broke the tradition of only having 2. So they put in the Constitution in 1951 that a president can only have 2 terms. Amendment number 23, actually allows the Washington District of Columbia to have electors to elect president not to be any more than the least populous state. 24, which was ratified in 1964, extends universal voting right, and also makes poll taxes that actually used to charge you to vote, poll taxes and literacy tests, which were very popular in the South and used as a device to stop African Americans from voting, was deemed illegal. 25 sets up the process of secession for president that I described in Article 2, going from the vice president to the president pro tempore, Speaker of the House, and the Secretary of State. And sets and puts all of that into place, so that the matter of secession is pretty clear. This was vitally important in '67 after JFK was shot, to make sure, considering it happened outside of Washington D.C. and how all that went down, to make sure that the process was more set into place than was before, and giving Congress certain powers on making sure that things were able to move forward. It also was a matter of the Cold War. If any part of the government were to be taken out, they wanted to have additional secession so that the continuation of democracy and the continuation of government could occur fairly flawlessly. The 26th Amendment extends voting rights down to those 18 years of age, especially a result of the Vietnam War. Before then, you had to be 21 to vote in any election. And the argument at the time was made that I can go off to fight and die in your war, but I cannot vote for who's going to send me there. And then the 27th is that no law varying the compensation for services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election or representatives shall have intervened. So that's the second article from the original Bill of Rights. Finally got ratified in 1992. So those are all the amendments with a little bit of explanation. I hope you got all of that. I encourage you to read. My voice is dry. At Cameron Cowan on Twitter, Facebook.com/The Cameron Cowan Show, email at CameronCowan.net, and I will see you for the next video. We'll talk soon now.